At the height of the Cold War, while most of the world still believed the sky was a neutral, unreachable frontier, the United States was already playing a game far more advanced than anyone could imagine. In the late 1950s, nations still relied on human spies, blurry aerial photographs, and defectors' testimonies to understand what their enemies were building behind closed borders. But deep inside classified laboratories, American engineers were working on something that sounded like science fiction: spy satellites capable of photographing Soviet military installations directly from space. To the public, space was still a mysterious dream. To Washington, it had already become strategic high ground. The project was codenamed Corona, and its existence was so secret that even many government officials had no idea what it truly was. The mission was simple yet revolutionary: place satellites in orbit that could capture high-resolution images of Soviet territory without Moscow being able to stop them. While the Soviet Union celebrated its own space victories, like the launch of Sputnik, the United States was quietly developing something far more dangerous: the ability to see everything. Missile bases, hidden factories, secret airfields deep in Siberia, nuclear facilities, all were slowly being mapped from orbit. For American strategists, this meant something unprecedented. For the first time in history, a superpower could observe its enemy without ever setting foot on its soil. No pilots were captured, no planes were shot down, no evidence was left behind. Just crystal clear photographs delivered straight to Washington inside film capsules ejected from space and recovered mid-air by U.S. aircraft. Yes, American pilots literally caught falling satellite film canisters in mid-flight. It was a level of technological sophistication that would have stunned any rival. And the Soviets? They had absolutely no idea this was happening above their heads. What makes this story even more remarkable is that for years, Moscow genuinely believed it was safe. Soviet generals trusted in massive distances, frozen landscapes, dense forests, and isolation as natural shields against espionage. Their logic was simple: if no one can physically reach us, no one can see us. But while they relied on geography, the Americans had already conquered gravity itself. The Corona program officially began in 1959, and after many early failures, rockets exploding, satellites lost, missions ending in disaster, the United States finally succeeded in 1960. For the first time, Washington received clear photographs of Soviet territory taken from space. What they discovered changed everything. The USSR did not have the massive number of nuclear missiles it had been claiming. For years, Soviet propaganda had spread fear by suggesting they possessed thousands of ready-to-launch warheads. This lie created panic in the United States and convinced politicians that America was falling behind. But the satellite photos proved the truth. The so-called missile gap was a myth. Suddenly, American leaders knew exactly where Soviet weapons were, how many existed, and how vulnerable they actually were. This intelligence completely shifted the balance of power. While Moscow relied on secrecy and bluffing, Washington now had facts. And facts win wars. If the Soviet Union ever planned a surprise attack, the United States would know in advance. That gave America an overwhelming strategic advantage, perhaps the greatest of the entire Cold War. The irony is incredible. While the world applauded Soviet space achievements, the U.S. quietly celebrated something far more important. They already owned the sky. American technology didn't just reach space, it turned space into a weapon. And when Soviet leaders eventually realized they had been watched for years, the shock was devastating. They believed their most secret installations were invisible. In reality, Washington had known their locations all along. For the Soviet leadership, the realization that American satellites had been quietly watching their most guarded secrets felt like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. At first, they suspected leaks, traitors, or human spies. How else could Washington suddenly know so much? But soon, intelligence analysts in Moscow began connecting the dots. Strange rocket launches, unusual orbital paths, Western newspapers celebrating scientific achievements that seemed suspiciously vague. The truth was unbearable. The United States had turned outer space into a surveillance platform. From orbit, American technology could see what no spy, no aircraft, no agent ever could. Entire missile fields in Kazakhstan, aircraft factories hidden in forests, nuclear test sites deep in the desert. Nothing was truly hidden anymore. This wasn't just intelligence gathering, it was domination of information. The Cold War was no longer just being fought on land, sea, and air. It had moved into space, and the Americans were already there first. For Soviet generals raised on secrecy, this was humiliating. Decades of camouflage, deception, and underground facilities were suddenly useless. The sky itself had betrayed them. But what made it even worse was how elegant the American system was. The satellites passed overhead silently, taking photos, then ejecting film canisters that parachuted back to Earth, where U.S. aircraft intercepted them mid-air. It looked like something from a science fiction novel, but it was real. While the Soviet Union was proud of putting the first man into space, the Americans were quietly using space for something far more powerful: control. Space wasn't just a symbol anymore. It was a battlefield, and the U.S. had claimed the high ground. Soviet leaders now faced a terrifying question. How do you defend against an enemy you can see? Before satellites, America's main tool for deep reconnaissance was the U-2 spy plane, an aircraft so advanced it could fly higher than any Soviet fighter or missile system could reach. In the mid-1950s, these planes crossed Soviet airspace almost freely, photographing military installations from extreme altitudes. Pilots described the experience as flying on the edge of space itself. The U-2 became a symbol of American technological confidence, a machine that literally flew above enemy defenses. For years, the Soviets were powerless to stop it. Their radar could see it, but their weapons couldn't touch it. This only reinforced the belief that American engineering was operating on another level. But in 1960, everything changed. A U-2 piloted by France's Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet territory. The incident exploded into a global scandal. Moscow proudly displayed the wreckage and the captured pilot, trying to prove they were no longer helpless. But the damage was already done. The shootdown only proved how desperate the Soviets were to catch up. And while the world focused on the U-2 incident, something even more powerful was happening quietly above the atmosphere. Satellites replaced planes. No pilot to capture, no wreckage to display, no borders to violate. The Americans had evolved. They learned from risk and adapted faster than their rivals. That's what made their technology so frighteningly effective. The Soviets could shoot down a plane, but how do you shoot down space? They couldn't, and they knew it. From that moment on, Soviet engineers raced to develop anti-satellite weapons, but they were always playing catch-up. The truth was undeniable. The U.S. had transformed intelligence warfare forever. They had moved the game beyond Earth itself, and Moscow was struggling to keep up. As the Soviet Union scrambled to understand how deeply American satellites had penetrated their secrecy, panic quietly spread through the highest levels of the Kremlin. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Maps were unrolled across long tables. Generals pointed to missile sites and air bases that were supposed to be invisible to the outside world. Now, suddenly, Washington seemed to know their exact locations. This was not just embarrassing, it was terrifying. The entire Soviet defense strategy depended on secrecy. Their doctrine was built on surprise, deception, and misinformation. If the United States already knew where their weapons were stored, how many they had, and how quickly they could be launched, then the entire balance of fear was collapsing. American technology had just stripped away the fog of war, and without that fog, Moscow felt exposed. Soviet scientists were ordered to analyze how these satellites worked. They tried to calculate orbital patterns, imaging angles, and camera capabilities. But the truth hurt. The Americans were far ahead. The Corona satellites used advanced panoramic cameras, capable of capturing massive stretches of land in a single pass. Each image revealed details that Soviet engineers believed impossible from such distances. Runways, hangars, vehicle convoys, even construction progress could be tracked over time. This wasn't random spying, it was systematic surveillance. Washington could now compare photos month by month, watching new bases appear and missile silos being built. The United States had achieved something no empire in history ever had before: continuous global observation. For the first time, a nation could monitor its enemy in near real time from orbit. That was power on a completely new level. What shocked Soviet intelligence the most was not just the clarity of the images. It was how long the Americans had been doing it. Years. While Moscow believed they were hidden, Washington already had an entire archive of Soviet military infrastructure. The realization was humiliating. Soviet leaders had spent billions on underground facilities, camouflage nets, fake buildings, and decoy bases. All of it was useless. From space, patterns were obvious. Tracks in the snow revealed movement. Construction scars in the ground gave away secret projects. Even fake structures could be identified by experts who knew what to look for. The Americans weren't guessing anymore. They were analyzing. This marked a turning point in warfare. Intelligence was no longer based on rumors. It was based on photographic proof. This gave the United States enormous confidence in negotiations. During arms talks, American diplomats already knew how many missiles the Soviets really had. They could call bluffs. They could challenge lies. For the first time, the U.S. was negotiating from a position of undeniable knowledge, and Moscow knew it. Behind closed doors, Soviet officials admitted they had been outplayed. The space race suddenly felt different. It wasn't just about prestige anymore. It was about survival. The Soviets realized that whoever controlled space controlled information, and whoever controlled information controlled the future. American engineers had not just built rockets. They had built a new form of power. Power that hovered silently above the earth, watching everything, revealing everything, changing the rules of the Cold War forever. Behind the scenes, the technology that made the Corona program work was just as astonishing as the satellites themselves. These were not simple cameras floating in space. They were precision-engineered machines designed to survive violent rocket launches, extreme temperature changes, and radiation, all while taking razor-sharp photographs from hundreds of kilometers above Earth. The film systems alone were revolutionary. Instead of transmitting images digitally, which was impossible at the time, engineers created a physical recovery system. Once the satellite finished its mission, it released a capsule containing exposed film. That capsule re-entered Earth's atmosphere at high speed, protected by a heat shield. Then, at the perfect moment, parachutes deployed. This is where it became truly unbelievable. U.S. Air Force aircraft, usually modified C-119 or C-130 planes, flew precise interception missions to catch the falling capsule in midair using large hooks. If they missed, Navy ships waited below to retrieve it from the ocean. The coordination required was insane. Pilots had to time their approach perfectly, watching the sky for a tiny falling object while flying at speed. And they succeeded again and again. This was technology operating at the edge of human capability. Every recovered capsule delivered intelligence that could reshape global strategy. Engineers, analysts, and military planners gathered around light tables, examining every inch of film. They zoomed in on shadows, tire tracks, fuel tanks, and construction patterns. Entire careers were built around interpreting these images. The United States had created a new profession: satellite intelligence analysis. And they were pioneers. No country on Earth had ever done this before. Each successful mission made the system more reliable. Cameras improved. Resolution increased. Orbits became more precise. What started as experimental turned into routine. America had industrialized space surveillance. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union still believed their most secret installations were hidden. The gap wasn't just technological, it was philosophical. The Americans treated intelligence as a science. The Soviets treated secrecy as a shield. Science won. Once Moscow fully understood what was happening, they reacted with panic. Orders went out to camouflage bases, move equipment under cover of darkness, and build decoy structures. Fake missile silos were constructed. Dummy aircraft were parked on runways. Entire facilities were covered with netting. But it was too late. American analysts could see patterns. They could distinguish real activity from staged deception. A real base has supply roads, fuel deliveries, security perimeters, heat signatures, construction scars. A fake base doesn't. The satellites exposed everything. This forced the Soviet military into a defensive posture. They no longer felt invisible. Every new project had to assume it was being watched from orbit. This psychological pressure was enormous. The Cold War was built on fear and uncertainty, but the United States had removed uncertainty, at least for itself. That alone was a strategic victory. It also changed how Washington behaved on the world stage. American leaders could now speak with confidence. During arms negotiations, they knew exactly what the Soviets possessed. They could challenge exaggerations. They could expose lies. The power dynamic shifted quietly but permanently, and the Soviet Union knew it. This wasn't just about weapons anymore. It was about information dominance. The U.S. had proven something shocking. You didn't need to invade a country to control it strategically. You just needed to see it. From that moment on, every major military power understood the same lesson. Space was no longer symbolic. It was operational, and America had gotten there first. The Cold War had a new battlefield orbit, and the U.S. owned it. By the mid-1960s, the impact of American space surveillance had completely transformed how wars were planned and how power was measured. For the first time in history, a nation no longer had to guess what its enemy was building. The United States could literally count missile silos, track bomber bases, and observe naval ports in real time. This level of awareness was unprecedented. Generals who once relied on outdated maps and unreliable reports now held photographic proof in their hands. Every decision became more calculated, every move more precise. The fog of war, which had protected armies for centuries, was slowly evaporating. And at the center of this transformation stood American innovation. The Corona program didn't just produce images, it produced confidence. Washington could now respond to threats based on facts, not fear. During crises, leaders no longer panicked over rumors. They consulted satellite data. This changed everything during moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis, when American intelligence confirmed the presence of Soviet nuclear weapons in Cuba. That verification prevented catastrophic miscalculations. It wasn't luck, it was technology. While the world held its breath, the United States had eyes in the sky guiding every decision. Behind the scenes, teams of analysts worked day and night, poring over photographs with magnifying glasses and light tables. They measured shadows to estimate missile heights. They compared construction phases week by week. They tracked the movement of vehicles and equipment. Intelligence became a science. The Americans weren't just observing, they were mastering the art of seeing, and that mastery gave them an edge no empire in history had ever possessed. For the Soviet Union, this new reality was deeply unsettling. They were used to secrecy being their greatest weapon. Now, it was useless. No wall was high enough. No forest was thick enough. No desert was remote enough. From orbit, everything was visible. Soviet engineers desperately tried to catch up. They launched their own reconnaissance satellites, but they lagged behind in image quality and reliability. While the U.S. refined its systems, Moscow struggled with frequent failures. Each American success only widened the gap. Western intelligence quietly celebrated every new satellite launch. They knew what it meant: more data, more clarity, more control. And the world didn't even know this battle was happening. There were no headlines, no parades, no speeches, just silent machines orbiting Earth, changing history. This is what made American dominance so powerful. It was invisible. While rivals focused on tanks, rockets, and troops, the United States invested in something smarter: information superiority. They understood a simple truth long before anyone else: whoever controls information controls the battlefield. This mindset would later define modern warfare. Drones, GPS, real-time surveillance. It all started here. In these early spy satellites, America wasn't just winning the Cold War with weapons. They were winning it with vision, literal vision. And by the time the Soviet Union realized how far behind they were, it was already too late. As American satellite intelligence became more reliable, its influence spread far beyond military strategy. It reshaped diplomacy, economics, and even global psychology. For the first time, U.S. leaders could negotiate with certainty. They no longer had to accept Soviet claims at face value. If Moscow said it had built a new missile base, Washington could verify it. If the Kremlin claimed massive expansion, American analysts could prove whether it was true or exaggerated. This changed the entire balance of power. Diplomacy stopped being guesswork and started being data-driven. The United States entered arms control talks knowing exactly what was on the other side of the table. That confidence made American negotiators stronger, calmer, and more strategic. The world never saw the satellite photos, but they shaped every major decision. Presidents consulted intelligence briefings before speaking publicly. Military commanders planned based on orbital passes. Space had become a silent advisor. This was the moment when American technology stopped being just impressive and became unstoppable. No other nation had built such a system. Not only did the U.S. invent it first, but they perfected it. Every new satellite generation became smaller, sharper, and more efficient. What once took weeks now took hours. Information flowed faster than ever. The Cold War became a chess match where the Americans could see most of the board, while their rivals played half blind. Inside the Soviet Union, frustration grew. Engineers were under pressure. Scientists were interrogated. Party officials demanded answers. How had the Americans done this? How were they always one step ahead? The answer was painful. Innovation, culture. While the Soviet system was rigid, bureaucratic, and secretive, the American system encouraged competition, private companies, and rapid experimentation. Universities worked with the military. Private firms pushed boundaries. Failure wasn't punished, it was studied and improved. That culture produced breakthroughs. The Corona program was proof. It started with failures, explosions, lost satellites. But instead of stopping, Americans refined it. They learned. They adapted. That mindset crushed their competitors. This is what made American technology so dominant. It wasn't just machines, it was mentality. The Soviets had brilliant scientists too, but they worked in fear. Americans worked with curiosity, and curiosity wins. Slowly, even Soviet intelligence officers admitted it in private. The U.S. wasn't just spying. They were redefining how power worked in the modern world. Wars would never be the same. And it all started with those silent satellites, floating high above the planet, watching everything, changing everything. By the late stages of the Cold War, the American satellite advantage had become undeniable. What started as a risky experiment had evolved into a global surveillance network that shaped world politics. The United States no longer feared surprise attacks the way it once did. They had created a shield made of information. Every major Soviet movement was analyzed. Every new base was monitored. Every test launch was recorded. The idea of a secret military project became almost impossible. This changed how wars were prevented. Deterrence became smarter. Instead of guessing intentions, American leaders could see preparations forming in real time. This reduced panic and prevented reckless decisions. In many ways, this technology helped avoid nuclear war. That's the hidden truth. While missiles and bombs get the headlines, it was American surveillance technology that kept leaders calm during the most dangerous moments in history. The Cold War was a game of nerves. Whoever blinked first lost. And because the U.S. could see more clearly, they blinked less. That confidence came from orbit, from machines silently circling the Earth, collecting truth frame by frame. The irony is powerful. The same space that once symbolized peace and exploration became the ultimate high ground, and America claimed it first. When the Soviet Union finally collapsed in 1991, the analysts pointed to economics, politics, and internal failures. But behind the scenes, technology played a massive role. The U.S. had simply moved faster, thought smarter, adapted quicker. While the Soviet system struggled to innovate, America kept reinventing itself. Spy satellites were only the beginning. They led to GPS, real-time battlefield intelligence, and modern drone warfare. Everything we see today traces back to those early Cold War breakthroughs. This is why the story matters. It's not just history, it's the origin of modern power. The moment America decided to dominate information, the world changed forever. Other nations followed, but the U.S. wrote the blueprint, and that is what shocked the Soviets the most. Not just that they were being watched, but that they had been outmatched in a way they never expected. They thought power came from tanks and soldiers. America proved it came from innovation, from vision, from thinking 10 steps ahead. In the end, the Cold War wasn't won with a final battle. It was won quietly, in orbit, by machines no one could see. And that may be the most impressive victory of all.